Now it is. Okay, so we need to get the current list of to-dos. What am I using to get my to-dos? Axios dot get to the URL, and I'll just put my name into it. All right, so Axios, we haven't learned much about the behind the scenes, but it is, what JavaScript mechanism is it using? We learned the word yesterday, I believe. Okay, it is receiving and parsing JSON, but what does this return? If I were to save, const result equals, what would result be? Ah, it's a promise, a pending promise. Why is it pending? Yeah, because that's returned immediately, but this is not something that finishes immediately. It's something that goes and communicates with the server and then comes back. So even though it may only be a couple milliseconds in our time, for a computer, that's quite a lot of time for computations. So it says, I promise it's coming back. When it comes back, I'll put it in the dot then if it was successful. I'll put it in the dot catch if it went badly. So I'm gonna console log the response here. Just make sure I see it coming back, and console log the error. Make sure that's being handled if that happened. Now I can go into my document and see whether or not that worked. Console, object, data. Great, so response.data is my array of to-dos. I got quite a few of them. I want to make sure some of them have an image URL. All right, at least one of them does, so we can work with images. Does anyone else have a to-do list that's prettier than mine, that they all have like valid image URLs and you're not afraid of sharing it? Kaylin? Is yours Caetlyn?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah, this is a little easier to play with. So we got, cool, 2 are completed, 1 is not. They all have valid image URL paths. Perfect, this is what we want. We're gonna be using Caitlin's list for the time being. All right, so I have my data, and I'm gonna open this up a bit more to do some more computations once the data comes back. So I'm gonna put its own variable so we can see it. I'm gonna say const to-dos equals the response data. And what data format is this in? Is it JSON? It's JavaScript. Why is it already JavaScript? We did get JSON back. Axios parses it for us. So response has already been parsed. We're good. So we've got JavaScript. We're just putting it in a variable so it's easier to read. And now we need these to-dos to show up when the page loads. So I could do the whole process here, and we're actually going to do the whole process here and then move it into its own function to see why I did that in the first place in the previous example. So what do I need to do with my to-dos to make them all show up? What's the very first thing I'd write? If I have a list of items and I need to repeat a process on each item in that list. And I'm not going to write a function yet.
For each loop?
I could do a for each, or I could do a for loop. I'm going to do a for loop for the sake of being as imperative as possible, because I like being upset, apparently. I plus plus. Okay, so I got my to-dos back. I'm looping over them, and I need to, 1, create elements, 2, edit the elements, 3, append the elements. And this is what I'd like to create. So each to-do object, has a title, description, completed, image URL. What I want to create is this. I want a div. I want an H1 with the title. And I want a P tag with the description. That's what we're going to start off with. This is what I want to put on the DOM for every single item in this list. So we should have 3 or 4 of these by the end of it. Depending on how many to-dos are in here. So what is the first element I would create if this is my end goal? Div. I'll call it to-do container. It is the container for the to-do. document.create element div. All right, what other elements do I need to create? Yes, so I need to make one for the title. I'll just call it title. Document.create element h1. And then one other one, description. Document.create element p tag. Any questions up to this point? Why am I creating 3 elements? We're following? Shout out if we're not. All right, editing the elements. To get to this goal that we have right now, what elements am I editing and what am I editing on them? I'll put this to Mark.
What's the question? Oh, we're editing elements?
Yeah, so what elements am I editing? And
The ones coming up from
yeah, the to-dos. So I need to edit the title and description so they look, you know, they actually have the title and description. So what property of these elements am I editing? Title dot. I could do inner HTML, but I don't need to add tags. So yeah, the best one for this is text content. And or inner text. Text content is actually, is inner text a thing? It is. Yeah, this is almost the exact same as saying text content.
So what's the difference between inner text and text content?
I don't think there is much of one. There might be, but
But inner HTML is not stable.
yeah, well, inner HTML is fine, but it allows you to put elements in it as well, and it creates elements for you. So we're just going to use text content because we don't need to create an element here. We just need to get the title into this H1.
So inner HTML is like a little more risk.
Yeah, because you can inject HTML into it as well. So how do I get the title of the current to-do into this H1?
No,
To-dos? Yeah, the current to-do I'm looping over is dot title. Right, I'm looping over an array of them here. The one at bracket 0, 1, or 2, depending on the one I'm on, add that current title to the current H1 I just created. And also do the same with description. So description dot text content equals to-dos bracket I dot description. Not too bad, right? At least not yet. All right, 3, what am I appending into what? I'll give this to Dan. What am I appending? Oh, you're good. Yeah, if I call your name, you don't do anything, or you're doing something else. Random. What am I appending into what? I need to create this from what I have.
Okay, so you're appending it to the H1.
I got my to-do container, which is the div, got the title, which is the H1, and the description, which is the P tag. So I need to get the H1 and the P tag into the div before I put the div on the DOM. Yeah, it's a little bit of a mind melter. Diana, you have? Yeah, first, perfect. First, the div I made, I'm going to append into it the title, and I'm also going to append into it the description. So now,
So
The div is the to-do container.
yes,
Okay.
div H1 and P tag. So-
don't you want to set attribute?
Not yet, we'll get to that. Okay, so I have this now created in JavaScript. Does it exist on the HTML yet? No, I'm appending stuff. Doesn't that mean it's going on the DOM? Well, if the thing I'm appending onto is on the DOM, then it will show up. But this to-do container only exists in JavaScript at this point. So once I've built it, it has all the content it needs. I now need to get this container into the actual DOM. And I have nothing for it yet, so I'm gonna make a div over here with the ID of to-do list. And this is where I can append that to-do when I'm finally done building it. So this is the very, very last step. Even once we get to the end of this project, this is the last thing you do. You'll say, document.get element by ID, to-do list, and append onto it the to-do container, the current to-do we're on.
Let's save their HTML.
Yep.
So you just put that on there.
Yeah, it's somewhere, it exists already because I need somewhere to put everything to, and it's not best case to append stuff to the body. You could, but it's kind of messy. Give it a box to put things in, so when the for loop is iterating here, we're just throwing everything into that box. Now, nothing's showing up. Why could that be? Or where would I look to know why this isn't working?
Have you addressed app.js on index.html?
I have.
Okay.
Cool. That's a great start. Make sure I'm connected. All right, debugging process then. Where am I looking to see what's the problem? Console. And we're gonna see it right away. Uncaught syntax error on line 26. I'm like, what the? Scroll down and, oh yeah, what's this? I was pseudocoding and did not erase my pseudocode. So let's get rid of that. And our to-do show up. A lot of laundry. Start a cult. That's new. Well, this took a turn. This took a turn. Okay.
Now we all know.
Yes.
Well, fortunately, this is part one, the first two steps. We've already caught these first two bullet points. And you're like, already, this is a whole lot of code. It is, but we can make this a little easier to look at. Now, you wouldn't typically do it this way. And what I mean by this way is in my .then of my GET request, I'm doing all of these operations. What would be a better thing to do? There is a function that I could write a function that does all of this. And so I'm separating my logic. This would be easier to look at for sure. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call a function called list to-dos on the DOM, being as descriptive as I can. And I'm going to call this function and pass in the to-dos. Does this function exist? No, it doesn't. I just made it up. So now I need to go write it and implement it. I'll say function list to-dos to the DOM. You're going to expect some to-dos or an array and do something with it. Well, what do we want this function to do? Which line numbers from this block here could we move down into that function now?
9 on down.
So from here on down, oh, that's 10. Yeah, 9 to, yeah, all of this. I can cut it out of here and put it into here, and my app still works the same way. But this is a lot easier to look at now. I got the to-dos, and now I'm doing an operation on them. Rather than just writing it line after line after line and getting this long, long block without much separation, here's my GET request. Here's my handling the data that came back from the GET request. And because I called the parameter to-dos, I didn't have to change anything about what I did up above. If I called this ARR, I'd have to change every reference to the word to-dos to ARR to make it work. That makes sense a little bit more why I'm calling a function in the .then. Once we build it out, we see it getting large and we're like, you know what, let's separate this. This gets the data and then hands it off to a function that can receive it and do the operations we need. Great. Okay, so that is the first 2 steps of part 1. Let's do the other 2 steps. What is the next process? All right, if the to-do item is complete, it should have a strike-through line on it. Now, how do we know if a to-do item is complete or not? What property of the to-do will let us know? Completed. Yeah, so we have to-dos bracket I.title, we have to-dos bracket I.description, we also have to-dos bracket I.completed, and it will be a Boolean, either true or false. So I need to check, while I'm looping over my to-dos, I need to check, is the current to-do I'm on completed? And if so, apply style to it. So what part of the 3-step process would I be doing this in? Edit, yeah. The element's created. It has nothing to do with creating the element. It has nothing to do with putting it on the DOM. It's all about changing stuff about our elements before putting it on the DOM. So how could I see if the current to-do is completed? What would I write here? Need to ask.
If to-do dot completed or to-dos dot I completed.
Yeah, if to-dos bracket I dot completed. If that is true, this will be true. If it's not done, it'll be false. So we could see, you know, is a triple equals to true? That's redundant. Just putting the variable there is asking the exact same question. If this is true or if this is false. All right, if it is completed, what do we want to do with the current title? Well, it should have a strike through line on it. How could I add a strike through to this H1? 2 ways. I could inline style or I could apply a class, one or the other. Let's look at both. Hey, okay. We could say title.style.text decoration equals line through. Now for each of the ones that are completed, they automatically have a line through and they show up on the DOM. That makes sense? What we did there, right? It's not that whole lot of code. And in fact, if you're only doing one thing with an if statement, you don't even need those brackets. You can just put it on the line right after it and we'll still do it just fine. If you want to keep it nice and tidy, or if it's easier to read, let's put it in its own little scope there.
Where's the completed function?
There is no completed function. I'm simply asking, while I'm looping through the to-dos to put them on the DOM, hey, is the current to-do I'm on completed? If so, put some text decoration on the title before you put it on the page.
So it's completed, something we can write?
Nope, it's a property of the to-do, just like title and description. So this is where you got to make sure we know what the data we're using. And it can be really helpful if we're on the to-do API docs that we have. It'll say each to-do looks like this. There is a dot completed Boolean on every to-do we have that defaults to false once it's true. And that's what we're checking. We're using the title and the description for display purposes, and now we're using the completed Boolean to adjust that display, adding a line through if it's true. Sure enough. Well, how can I do this with a class instead of a inline style?
We could, in HTML, get a class ID and then add that as an element.
We can't add it on the HTML because these won't exist on the HTML until the page loads, unfortunately. You're on the right track, though.
So then we just switch the CSS style element.
So this is, I think this is the most straightforward way to do it. Let's make a class called completed. And we'll say the text decoration for this class is a line through. All right, so now we have a class that has that styling declared. In our JavaScript, if the current to-do is completed, then the title.classList should add the completed class. And it'll have the same effect. And this is actually preferred. Why would this be preferred over inline styling?
It's easier to change
Easier to change, easier to adjust, and it's separation of concerns. CSS is in the CSS, JavaScript is in the JavaScript, and so forth. And yeah, if I wanted to add more to my my completed class, I don't have to keep adding style lines here for each property. All I have to do is add the class name and then add properties to this class. So I could also make the color red if it's done. And font size, 200 pixels, because I don't know. Do laundry.
How did you add the class name?
Class list. So each element has a .class list that has 3 methods on it: add, remove, and toggle. So I'm just adding a class to this H1. We're literally, if we went here to always visualize in the elements console, that really helps. We go on the to-do list, and the first one's not done, so there's no class on this H1, but this div is done, so this has the completed class on it. But this is all being generated in JavaScript and then just dumped onto the HTML page.
Yeah, that's not good.
We're missing something. Do the cha-cha. Start a cult and do the cha-cha. I saw a documentary about something like that. A lot of people died. Started a cult, did some dancing. All right, so I'm not gonna like nix you if you're doing inline styling, but you're causing more work for yourself than you need to. It's way easier to edit a class versus editing inline styles. All right, so that is the third item of part 1. What's the last one again? It is images should be displayed if there are any. Ooh, okay, so we need to get the images to show up in here. So what do I need to do? It's the first thing I need to do.
So you can make like an if statement that says like to-dos, bracket I, and then the name of the key to the value pair of the JSON. If that's the image key, then put I inside of the image.
Yes.
I'm on the right lines.
You're on the right lines. We won't have to ask any questions. We'll just apply it if it does. It won't apply it if it doesn't. But what do I need to do first in this for loop process? If my end goal is to get an image to show up? Yeah, create the image element. So following the same process, I'll create the image element, document.create element image. Right, edit the elements. What attribute on an image tag allows you to set the URL to what image should be loaded? I think I heard it. Source, yeah. So we need to create this. We have this right now. In step 2, we need to add this, so it knows which image to load. So how do you add an attribute to a tag? Yeah, Caitlin.
Just img.src equals.
Yeah, we just got objects here. All these elements are just objects, so we can say img.source should be the current to-dos image URL. So that is one way to do it. Another way to do it, all tags also have a set attribute method. So we could also say image.setAttribute, create the source attribute and set it equal to the current to-dos image URL. Either of these lines would work. It's up to you which one you want to use.
What's the big difference between the two?
There really isn't any. This is an extra function call. So this may be best case for this one. I use set attribute for attributes that don't exist on the object by default. But since source exists on image tags, we're just going to say image.source. All right, the image isn't showing up yet, so what do I need to do? What am I appending it to? The to-do container, the thing that's holding all the other parts of this to-do. Append child image. Oh, okay, we got some images. Well, this is nice. This one, jeez. My nightmares. Okay, so the images are a little larger than I'd like them to be. What is the easiest way to get all these images to show up the same way?
When just be doing CSS.
CSS image.
Okay.
Why can't you just put them under the set image.style.width?
All right, so I could say image.style.width equals 20 pixels. Make them see.
Go to our style.
Yeah, I think it's going to be easier, just like with the title. If we just say image.classlist.add image styles, you know, a class that we create. Now all we have to do is go to CSS and keep writing CSS like we normally do. Image styles, width 100 pixels, and get them to all format.
So the image class, add class, that's just like you have the class.
Yeah.
Did you put in the code page?
Did I what?
Did you put in the code?
No.
Caitlin says he didn't.
Oh, anyone can post to anyone at their to-do list if they have your name. Start a cult. Be lying if I said I wasn't a little scared, but okay. So that is part one. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed it. How did you resize the photos?
I add, just like I did to the title, adding a class, I added to the image a class, and then I went to the CSS and created that class. And that way I can just keep adding properties here rather than saying image.style.image.style.image.style.
So where did you add this style to where did you add the class?
There for the title, there for the image.
Well, why not just, instead of doing it as a class, why not just in the CSS just change the image?
Because what if I have other images on the site later? I don't want to have the same property. But yeah, you have a point. If this is contrived, I could have really just said all image tags just look like this, and that would do it. But getting specific here. Okay, so part two, as you keep going through, you're going to keep creating elements. You're going to edit the element, and then you're going to append it to the to-do container. You'll see them slowly get added to the page. But I think step two is you actually have to come back into here and create a form for the post request, if I'm not mistaken. So that would be part two. Has anyone gotten part two to work? Posting items? A couple of us? Cool. We'll keep working on that. One or two more notes on this and we'll call it good for now. Notice again that when I listed this out, I created a div first, to-do container. How many of these to-do containers exist? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I wanted to create a box for each item. This is a repeated item, but I don't want to come into my elements console and just see H1P tag image, H1P tag image, H1P tag image. It's really hard to separate one to-do from the other. But if I put each grouping of to-do data into its own div, I get this nice effect on the DOM where each one has its own box. And that's why I created a div first and then put all the elements in that div and then just put the div onto the DOM. I'm creating a box, I'm creating all the things to put in the box, putting all the things in the box, and then finally putting that finalized box of things onto the DOM. And that's great, because if I added a class to it as well, I'll say a to-do container.classlist.add to-do container. This may be the name of the class. This is great, for styling purposes at least. So I can say to-do container border 1 pixel solid black, and border radius 5 pixels. And I can already see a separation of to-dos, each one that the for loop is mapping through. I can give them all margin to space them out. I can even make each div a flex box. The items flex inside of them. I could make each div a grid if I wanted to display each to-do as its own grid. And I only have to style it once, but each div that's created has those styles. So it's a really nice way of doing CSS with this.
How would you do it as a grid?
Display grid, template, columns, repeat 3 times 1 afar. I got a grid. 1 column, 2 column, 3 column, 1 column, 2 column, 3. Each one is its own little grid box. However you want to do it. Why are the heights different?
No, I figured.
It's the images. So what if I wanted all these to-dos to have the same height? What would I do? Regardless of the image size, I want all these to take up the same screen space. Yeah, I have to set a height on my container. So each to-do can only be 250 pixels tall. Now they're all the same size, but then we run into this issue. Oh, this image is busting out of its border. Yeah.
Overflow hidden?
What's that?
Would it be overflow hidden?
Yeah, you can do that. Make sure anything that pops out of the box stays in the box. But we're still losing some of the pictures. So this is where I'd swap the image for like a div and put the image as a background image on it. So it's easier to manage. Instead of an image tag, you use a div and use CSS to apply the image by saying background image equals a URL and put your image URL in there. Oh goodness. HTTP image.com. That's not a real thing, but you can put background images on a div rather than using an image tag. Then you get the other background properties, which makes the image easier to style and handle. For image tags, it's like, give me a width and good luck. This is a good start though. At this point, you can then practice adding to-dos, make sure they show up.
So what if you need like some sub-steps, like you start a call, and you want to have like a list of things within your call to do to get that going?
We need a different API that supports that functionality.
You have to add like table rows.
Yeah. All right, so minimal CSS for the most part. Space out the items. Now we got like a little Reddit list. This one's actually pretty good. I don't know where you found that image, but is this like a Twilight Zone image? It's gotta be.
Is it Twilight or is it like children?
Yeah, I thought it was children of the corn.
Oh man.